Good morning, everyone, and very excited to join you all and everyone for today's Infrastructure Environment Subcommittee meeting. I am severely lacking today, my co-chair and one of our some of our amazing staff. So it's just me, but we are excited to get things rolling. Senator Lackman is in JFC today, so she is handling some money stuff. But we met last week and kind of were recognizing and talking about that today is our second to last subcommittee meeting. Our work is coming very quickly to an end, even though it kind of feels like we just got started, but we've been able to accomplish so much in the time that we have been meeting as a subcommittee. So with that, one of the things that we also realized is that there's only 2 more meetings for the larger body African American task force. And so that gives us an opportunity to elevate 4 more of our, kind of feels like of our recommendations to the body. And then we will talk about kind of what is able to happen with the remaining recommendations. So today may be a quick meeting, but hopefully we'll be able to get some robust dialogue in around these subcommittee recommendations that we have. But before we get there, Reed, I'm going to ask if you would take attendance roll call, please.
Sure. Harold Stafford.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. Good morning.
Willie Scott.
Present.
Dan Young. Janet Cobb. Marlena Gibson.
Caitlin Dalcalo, proxy for Marlena.
Okay, great.
Present.
Marlene Sanders.
You muted, Dr. Sanders.
I saw one earlier.
Oh yeah, she's here.
Sorry, I'm here. I keep.
No problem. Abby Samuels. Simone Philpotts. Wendy Henry.
Present.
And Representative Lambert.
Present.
Madam Chair, it looks like we have a quorum.
Now I'm the one on mute. Thank you, Reed.
Oh, I'm sorry. And I guess you're the.
Yeah, I am also present. Thank you. I don't know if everybody had a chance to review the minutes, if we want to move on the minutes, or if anybody had any changes or recommendations that they wanted to see before. If not, I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, and Reed, I think we need to do a roll call on the minutes.
Senator Pinckney.
Yes, thank you.
Willie Scott.
Yes.
Marlene Saunders.
Yes.
Wendy Henry.
Yes.
Representative Lambert.
Yes.
Harold Stafford.
Yes.
And Caitlin Dalcalo.
Yes.
Great.
Right, and so we have been able to move and approve our minutes. And so I'm just going to quickly pull up on my screen the remaining recommendations. And what I'm hoping that we can do is just kind of go through them. I know we did send out the poll, but we didn't receive responses for everybody. So what I wanted to do is just kind of go through from the responses that we received and kind of figure out which ones we wanted to elevate. So we'll be able to elevate 2 additional recommendations in the next I'm sorry, I am lying. We have one more full body African American task force, so we're able to uplift 2 more recommendations. And with the rest, what we will do is talk about the body that will be created to kind of continue the rest of the work that we have recommended and other subcommittees have recommended, but we're not able to get past. And are you able to see the passed by the subcommittee, but not the African American Task Force piece? Okay. And Mr. Scott, we did get your responses to the survey, so thank you for that. We got a couple others, but we'll go through the ones that we do have, if that's okay with everybody. So the first one we have is the General Assembly should pass legislation creating the right to creating a tenant's right to counsel, establishing a minimum amount of arrears that must accrue before eviction can be filed. So we've been talking about this one for a while, and we tried to get it through the task force a while ago, I believe, but had to table it. So I know this has been one that was kind of importance to everyone. I'm not sure if we'll be able to elevate it. So I'm going to move on to that one just because we have recommended it to the subcommittee, to the full body, and for other reasons we weren't able to move on that one. But it will still the bill is still out there. So hopefully we can, as individuals and as the subcommittee, use the recommendation of the subcommittee to uplift the Senate Bill 101. Okay, the next one is the General Assembly should pass the joint resolution encouraging landlords and landlords and third body tenant screening companies to review and revise tenant screening practices. This ought to include following HUD's guidance on the use of criminal backgrounds and eliminating the reliance on FICO scores. Is that one that members feel like we should prioritize above the others? And is this the most effective way to go through these one by one? Or if we think there's a more effective way to do it, let me know.
No, I think we're good.
Any votes for this one to be the recommendation that we put forth on in the April full body meeting?
This is Marlene Saunders. I particularly like this recommendation because recent data, indicate that a person having a low FICO score doesn't necessarily, indicate, the kind of tenant they will be. There are similar data indicating the same thing for a folk who have a criminal record. The data in that case indicate that those individuals, end up being, credible tenants. So I just wanted to say that I think this is particularly, important, especially in light of inefficient, affordable housing. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you, Dr. Saunders. I think you're right on target with that. So I support that totally.
Likewise, the state's practice ought to be at least consistent with what HUD, recommends, and this brings us closer to alignment with HUD. So it seems like the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely agree with the spirit of the recommendation. I do remember, though, that when we voted on this as a subcommittee back in June, we definitely heard from the landlord community that they were not a fan of the wording and the intent. And Senator Lockman and Pinckney and I actually had a follow-up meeting with some stakeholders around this topic. And so I worry that if we choose this one to elevate it to the full body, we might have a hard time getting full body members to vote on it. And so I don't know if we want to take the chance of, using one of our 2 slots for recommendations on one that we're not maybe as confident will pass. I also want to note that almost all of the recommendations so far that we've gotten through the full body level have been housing related. So even though I'm now with DSHA and I represent the the housing aspect of things, I wonder if we would want to use our 2 opportunities to focus more on environment. That's just food for thought. But again, I'm certainly in favor of the spirit of what that recommendation is about.
Okay, Caitlin, I guess a couple of questions. One being, well, I'll save the first one for last. In terms of the wording, I mean, what this particular suggestion describes is that we would encourage landlords and third-party tenants. So it's not a requirement, the way I read it. So I guess I'm a little bit curious as to the opposition to the language.
Sure, yeah. So as I recall, Scott Kidner, who represents the Housing Delaware Apartment Association, indicated that a joint resolution, even though it is not the same as passing a law that requires you to do anything. It's a very strong statement on the part of the General Assembly, and so again, that makes me concerned about getting it through the full body level, and then actually getting enough members of the General Assembly to pass the resolution.
Okay, thanks. And then I guess the other one, just for clarity on my part, you mentioned that all of the recommendations that have passed the full body so far were housing related.
Almost all, yeah.
Okay, because I think we had maybe 2.
2 the last meeting.
Right.
Yeah, I think if you scroll up, Senator Pinckney, I think we have submitted 6 that have gotten through the full body level, and 4 of those were housing related. So it's like a majority.
Got it.
Yeah.
And so, I'm kind of agnostic as to, what the final balance is between housing and environment, but I just wanted to kind of, remind people kind of what we've already done so we can think about.
And I think, Caitlin, you're right, because I do think that's where we left off in the last meeting, where we had moved to the environmental recommendations for that reason.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, just that, we should consider the big picture.
Yeah.
Like our overall portfolio.
No one can say you're biased where you are, huh?
Well, maybe what we can do is put a star by it, and then see where we are after we go through all of the recommendations. As a social worker, and certainly, Madam Chair and Harold can relate to this. Environment. It also includes situations in which people live. And environment, when you think of housing, when we think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, food, shelter, and housing, those items are number 1. You need to live in a safe environment in order to to function in other ways. Mm-hmm. And I can certainly think of the pushback during the pandemic regarding some landlords wanting to get people out. As soon as I don't know what the word is, embargo for giving people a break. There's a push to evict people was demonstrable. So you have to think of money making motivations, and I'm a landlord, so but I believe in I would want to be treated. I would want to treat people the way I would want to be treated if I was in a situation as a tenant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so I do have a star next to that one because I know we have the vote from Dr. Saunders and Mr. Scott on that one, so we do have a star for that one. For the third recommendation on SB 90, I'm going to skip this one too because we did get word from the last subcommittee meeting again that we're not able to do specific bills that were already out there. So that's why we had to table this one and SB 101. But again, we do have the fact that the recommendation that came through the task force that can help the bill sponsor with that bill. This next one is the General Assembly should establish a comprehensive monitoring system for all air and groundwater emissions in overburdened communities. The data from the system shall be publicly available through the existing My Healthy Communities website and used as a basis to assess cumulative impacts of future permit requests. Funding should include the development of test methods and equipment required to measure all constituents of pollutants released in overburdened communities. So that one is moving us to our conversation on environment. I will note too that, some of our environmental recommendations have, specifically the ones down here, came from Denmark, and we don't have Denmark with us this morning, so I will follow up with them offline. But for the groundwater emissions and the data sharing, any votes for this one to be one of the ones that we move to the larger body or bring before the larger body? Can you see?
Go ahead.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, I think this one in my mind is pretty fundamental to dealing with EJ issues in the state. I think it recognizes that, there's a gap in our ability to truly assess the levels of exposure that we're subjecting overburdened communities to. And so as we get into the permitting process or as we get into oversight of, how we allow industries to continue to operate in overburdened communities without the data to be able to, make some relative judgments around what's accessible or what's acceptable in terms of level of exposure. It's difficult. It's a difficult process. And, this is an issue I think the state has struggled with. In fact, I think the EPA is still struggling with how to measure, certain constituents. But I think until we can get to a point where we truly understand what's being emitted in certain communities, our ability to manage that is difficult. So this one is, in my mind, is pretty core and fundamental to addressing issues of environmental justice across the state.
And I agree. And for me, a critical concept word is cumulative impacts.
Right.
No.
I think we're going to see some really good legislation too that comes out around cumulative impacts soon. If it's not already filed, actually. Rep Lambert, curious on your opinion specifically with the work of the Justice 40 Committee.
I want to definitely piggyback off of what Mr. Scott and Dr. Saunders said. We have to proceed from a space of data. That's one of the things that has really held up meaningful, impactful progress in a lot of these areas. So there's a lot of work being done around this, and this really is a starting point, a basis for us to start with. Thank you.
Thanks, Rep Lambert. So it looks like we have 4 more to go through, and then once we go through them and continue to have dialogue, maybe we can kind of go back and determine what the final votes for each one would be, if that's okay with everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Moving on to, this is number 5. The General Assembly, the General Assembly should pass a resolution calling for a study of the penalties and fines violation defined by Delaware Code, defined in Delaware Code. Both civil and administration penalty limits should be increased to better reflect the total impact and current costs of violations. Additionally, human health and long-term environmental impacts should be included as factors in determining fines and penalties. The study should include recommendations for legislative action.
I think as I look at that, the one word that's missing seems like to me is it's not only determining fines and penalties, but enforcement, I think.
Yes.
But that's what's been missing for years in those underserved communities. You have a lot of laws and rules, regulations, but no enforcement. Or maybe I shouldn't say no, but not consistent or enforcement.
I think that's a valid statement.
Okay, so we might want, that means sounds like we might want to look at wordsmithing that one a little bit, which I will say we can kind of circle back to that just so we can get through the remaining ones. And again, since we don't have a since we don't have a vast majority of our subcommittee, we might want to hold off just for today on wordsmithing them, but I would put a star next to it.
Yeah, and the thing that concerns me about this one is limits and what that means, because I think there are situations where you have companies that continue to receive violations again and again and again.
Right.
How do we make sure that reality is reflected, in the law, and also how penalties are enforced. I think you get these huge penalties, and what they do is build trees or benches.
Yeah.
Rather than some type of penalty that really translates into something that benefits the community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Dr. Sanders, I think you're right. And there are a couple of factors here. The one you described around chronic violators, and there's actually a separate statute or regulation that addresses NREC's authority and people who routinely violate or exceed their permit levels. And so that may be a piece of work that could be joined to this, or maybe it's a separate piece of work. I'm not sure, but it's a factor that I think needs to be considered. The other component here is this thing around the limits. I think in a lot of cases, these become the cost of doing business for some companies. In other words, the cost, while they may to the typical person seem to be, significant levels of money, in a lot of cases, relative to the size of the institution or the corporation that's creating the violation, it's minimal, and it's just almost meaningless. So to your second point, we need to ensure that those penalties do have the impact of changing behavior, and a stimulus for changing behavior rather than just, a check that somebody writes, or like you said, buying some benches and moving on. So the ability to pay, I hate using that term, but there needs to be some scale that, considers the size of the corporation, what would represent a significant penalty to them. And, we don't wind up setting penalty limits that try to cover a broad range of businesses and may not have the right effect on large businesses. So there needs to be some scale of prorating, or, some way of ensuring that these penalties are in fact impactful and, a stimulus for change in behavior.
Mr. Scott, I think that's a really, really important point. It might even be something that we want to look at, kind of having its own recommendation. Senator Lockman's going to kill me for saying this, but it might be something that maybe we can get in kind of one more recommendation next week at our next meeting. It wouldn't be in time for the full body meeting, but perhaps, again, because we are creating this entity that's going to carry on the work of the overall task force, and that might be kind of something that we can say we pass this as the subcommittee and would like for the larger body to investigate, like, are the limits effective? If they're not effective, do we need to not make it so prescriptive to all companies, or should it be, like you said, a scale for company size and things like that? Maybe that's like one last recommendation that we can try to push out in our final meeting. I'm happy to talk to Senator Lockman about that, because I think that would be something really important to look at.
Yeah, but I think, on the other hand, the way we've got this written, that could be part of the study.
Okay.
Consider, what changes or modifications may be made to the existing code. I think, this whole notion of scaling penalties or ensuring that penalties are significant enough to influence behavior. I think that could be, within the scope of the study that we're describing here.
Okay. So again, we can look at then wordsmithing.
Right. The one I think we need to think about longer term is, how do you deal with chronic offenders? To Dr. Saunders' earlier point. And that, in fact, may be a separate, initiative.
Great. Okay. So I wrote all of that down for that's number 5. So that one we have some kind of just a little bit of work to come back and look at. So going on to number 6. DENREC should continue with efforts to create an environmental justice mapping tool to incorporate in decisions and processes. And I believe that these are some of the recommendations that we talked about in the last meeting. And so I'm not sure if—
I think for that one, DENREC's already committed to that piece of work.
Say that again, Mr. Scott?
I believe DENREC's already committed to this piece of work. So I'm not—
Yeah, that's correct. That's a part of the Justice for the Oversight Committee as well. Yes.
Okay. So I think Rep. Lambert, that is one that, and we don't necessarily need to move forward with this one because we know that the work is again already being done, and will be continued to monitor through the Justice 40. And
yes, and I want to thank the Infrastructure and Environment Subcommittee, because elevating and lifting these things up also does help, to complement what we do in Justice 40.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. And I believe it was something similar for this one as well. DENREC should improve public engagement in environmental justice communities based on results from its study and the work with Del State.
Yeah, that came up in last week's meeting with DENREC as well, yeah.
So that work is already being done as well. And so that brings us to the last one. Building on training given to managers in 2020, DENREC should train all employees in environmental justice philosophy and techniques and explore applicability to other agencies such as the Department of Health and Social Services and Department of Transportation.
Secretary Garvin said that he is working on that. But it's good that it's still here because, we're about follow through. Thank you.
So we kind of have the option of these 3 are already being worked on. So if we want an easy win, we know that these 3 are already being worked on. If we want to go a little bit harder, we can move forward with some of the other ones that we talked about as our final recommendations to the task force. And then again, remembering that the 2 that don't make it in this next meeting, again, the work will be continued by that larger body. So we will still have the Justice 40 Committee and the larger body that's going to come out of the African American Task Force that will be able to kind of keep an eye on the bills, on the recommendations that we don't move forward with. So with that in mind, what I would like to do is just kind of go back to there were 3 that kind of got a lot of conversation. And so I'd like to go back to those 3 and see if we do a vote on which 2 we'll walk away with. So that was number 2 here. The General Assembly should pass a joint resolution encouraging landlords and third-party tenant screening company to review and revise tenant screening practices. This ought to include following HUD's guidance on the use of criminal backgrounds and eliminating the reliance on FICO scores. So this is the one that we were saying there's a lot of importance and need for this, but it is we should recognize that it will be an uphill battle to try to get it out of the task force and then out of the General Assembly. So with that in mind, can we do just like a vote around if people think this is the one that we should recommend, that we should move forward with.
Could I make a couple comments?
Please.
Okay, so earlier Dr. Saunders said the magical phrase Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which all of my former Senate colleagues know is like my guiding star when it comes to policy. And so in recognition of that, I do think it is really important to highlight this to the full body. I wonder, though, if we'd be more successful if we wordsmith this one a little bit. And so I just I have, some ideas in my head about how we might rewrite it, but I'm curious if, others would be opposed to changing it up a little bit or if it needs to stay as is.
I'd like to hear your thoughts on what would make it more lucrative.
Sure. Okay. So it's the Division of Human Relations is responsible for fair housing training and enforcement. And so a possible rewording might say something like, fair housing stakeholders, including Division of Human Relations, should increase their outreach and education to landlords regarding tenant screening practices, including the use of criminal backgrounds and the use of credit checks.
I like that wording, Caitlin.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts?
Caitlin, can you say that again?
Yeah. Let me try to say it the same way. I can also email.
I'm trying to write it as you say it too, Caleb.
Yeah, I can definitely email it, but I think what I said the first time around was fair housing stakeholders, including the Division of Human Relations, should increase outreach and education to landlords about tenant screening practices, including the use of criminal background checks and credit checks. It's a little bit different because now we're kind of calling out the people that are actually tasked with doing this work. There are already people who are charged with ensuring that fair housing happens. And so making sure that they are doing that outreach so that landlords are aware, because I imagine some smaller landlords may not even have ever seen HUD's guidance on the use of criminal background checks. And I don't know, Dr. Saunders, I didn't realize you are a landlord yourself. I'd be curious as to your thoughts on this.
Well, part of me is saying if Harold likes it, I like it, because I just trust his experience and wisdom and the way he considers things using rational thinking. But I'm just wondering, as a landlord, how I would know to apply this perspective in considering a possible tenant who on the outside seems good, but in terms of FICO score or other indicators, raises questions. Now I know I use the tenant landlord guidelines. And I'm just wondering if your wording could be reinforced or made stronger by what you just said somehow being included, in the tenant landlord guidelines. I just think some. I was think strategically what you're saying is it makes sense, but. I know a lot of people, good people, who would be good led tenants, need a break, right. And sometimes people conveniently make decisions about potential tenants using purely black and white criteria. When you need to say, well, wait a minute, though. This person requires a second look, even though objective criteria might raise a flag.
But I agree with you too, Dr. Saunders, because I think as long as we don't lose that statement about the landlords following HUD's guidance
Okay.
on the use of the criminal background checks, I think that would, to me, make it a little tighter.
Okay.
So could we say instead, fair housing stakeholders, including the Division of Human Relations, should increase outreach and education to landlords about tenant screening practices, including following HUD's guidance on the use of criminal background checks, as well as the use of credit checks.
Yeah, with the focus being on education, right?
Right. I mean, that sounds a lot better to me.
Yeah, that's a logical first step, I think, is, to inform people and then, see what kind of response you get from that. And then you can always come back later on and revisit whether or not there needs to be an enforcement element.
Right.
Education would be a good first step.
Right, I agree.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, I'm gonna email that language to Senator Pinckney so that we can get that recorded.
Thanks for that feedback, everyone. Let's see. In Senator Pinckney's, she has to step away for a moment. I want to make sure that we're proceeding to the next item. I can't scroll on her screen, but I believe that we were skipping over the next item referencing Senate Bill 90. And if I could direct you to the last full bullet point, the General Assembly should establish a comprehensive monitoring system. I believe that was the next one that we wanted to take a look at. So we wanted to get feedback if everyone thought that this is the next item that we should raise to the African American Task Force as our next recommendation from the subcommittee.
Was that number 4 we moved on to?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much, Rep. Lambert.
You're welcome.
So,
I guess for clarity, this one would require a fiscal note, I'm assuming.
Once it's completed by the General Assembly, like when it becomes a bill, yes, it wouldn't be a fiscal note for us as a recommendation coming out of the task force. But,
Mr. Scott, I got a question. Did Colin O'Mara provide any recommendations around this one? Did he have any feedback on this?
Not that I'm aware of.
All right, thank you.
And I'm not sure he's even aware of it.
Yeah, I wasn't sure either.
Okay.
any votes for this one? Or did you guys want to move to number 5 and try to do the wordsmithing around number 5?
I would recommend we move to number 5 because I'm gonna have to get off in about 10 minutes for another meeting. And maybe do the wordsmithing.
We have to take official roll call of members for these votes.
We haven't finished yet though.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. You mean
on each recommendation we want to elevate, we have to take a vote of members present so I can record that.
okay. Let's do the wordsmithing on this one, and then we'll come back and do final votes for number 2, 4, and 5 as to be the final recommendation.
Well, if Mr. Stafford's leaving in 10 minutes, then we're going to lose quorum.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so let's then just do number 2. We'll do a roll call. So the roll call will be if you would like that to be the recommendation that is moved forward. So we have 3, we just need to get that down to 2.
So Senator, I just emailed you the suggested rewording. Is that what we want to vote on?
Yeah,
the rewording?
We would need to vote to approve the rewording.
Or you can just say that you're voting for the rewording. So it was just one vote.
Right.
Yeah.
I just want to make it clear that like when we're voting to elevate this one, it's the the reworded version, whether we actually have it up on the screen or not.
Right, right.
Okay, so I think I heard you guys going through the end of that just before I had to step away for a second. So if everybody's comfortable with the language that you all discussed in those last couple of minutes, then we'll take that vote.
Okay.
Read whenever you're ready.
Senator Pinckney,
Yes.
Mr. Scott,
Yes.
Dr. Saunders, Marlene Saunders,
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I said yes.
Wendy Henry,
Yes.
Rep. Lambert,
Yes.
Mr. Stafford,
Yes.
and Caitlin.
Yes.
Okay, great.
So we will elevate recommendation number 2 to the full body. And then it sounds like the interest is around number 5. So let's see if we can wordsmith this one really quick and take a vote on it. So Mr. Scott, since that was kind of between you and Dr. Saunders made that recommendation around how we include following determining whether or not the limits and penalties are appropriate for each company. Do you have any idea of where you would like to see that language added?
I'm muted. I'm sorry. So in that last sentence where it says additionally human health and long-term environmental impact should be included, I'm trying to come up with the right words and to interject in that statement.
Oh no, I don't know what I just did.
You broke it.
I totally broke it.
Yeah.
Can you do an undo?
No, not on this. Let me see. Hang on 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. There it is. Okay, sorry about that.
Okay.
So you said you would like to add it on just to this last sentence here?
I'm sorry, it's the next to the last sentence that starts with additionally. So as we get down to the second line, human health, long-term environmental impacts, and size and scope of the offending company, something along that line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's good.
Say that for me one more time.
So right after environmental impacts, comma, and the size and scope of the offending company or of the offending whatever. The offending entity, I guess.
So then it would read, additionally, human health and long-term environmental impacts and the size of the company should be included as factors in determining fines and penalties.
Works for me.
What about I know one thing that we focused on, we talked about were chronic offenders. Is there a way to, or will the rewording capture our concern about those kinds of transgressors.
Yeah, I think the initial thought in my mind was that there's a separate statute or regulation that deals with chronic offenders.
Okay, all right.
Fall under this one. Now, there's an element of, how fines are levied based on, frequency of violations, in terms of the degree of the fine or the amount of the fine. But then there's a whole separate section that deals with, the ability to revoke permits or take, criminal or civil actions for people who are chronic violators. Now, my thought was that, that whole section on chronic violations may be a separate piece of work and not necessarily part of the scope.
Yeah, I think that's where we had landed when we talked about it just a few minutes ago. But as something that maybe we could try to throw in one last recommendation in our last meeting to see if we can get something like that looked at by the larger body later on.
Sure.
Let me make one other suggested change, if you all would consider this. After the word determining, include as factors in determining and enforcing fines and penalties. What do you think?
Good.
Yeah. Outstanding.
Determining and enforcing fines and penalties.
Okay.
Okay, so the new recommendation, what I'm going to do is read this as it will be changed to, and then ask for a motion on that as if we agree with where it lands. So the new recommendation will read, the General Assembly should pass a resolution calling for a study of the penalties and fines for violations defined in Code 7. Both civil and administrative penalty limits should be increased to better reflect the total impact and current cost of violations. Additionally, human health and long-term environmental impacts and the size and scope of the offending entity should be included as factors in determining and enforcing fines and penalties. The study should include recommendations for legislative action. Did I capture it?
You did.
Okay.
Yep. You covered all the bases.
Very good.
I would love to entertain a motion to vote on this as our second elevated recommendation.
So moved.
Second.
Beautiful. And Reed, if you want to do a roll call.
Senator Pickney?
Yes.
Lee Scott?
Yes.
Marlene Saunders?
Yes.
Wendy Henry?
Yes.
Representative Lambert?
Yes.
Harold Stafford?
Yes.
And Caitlin Delcala?
Yes.
Great.
Okay, so the motion carries. So we will elevate as our final two recommendations to the full body task force, number 2, which will focus on the joint resolution, and number 5, which will get us focused on civil enforcement and limitations. That last and final full body meeting is on April 11th. And with that, the only other thing that I wanted to add before we go to public comment, we did decide in the last full body meeting to move forward with creating kind of a consortium that will follow this work from all of the leftover recommendations from each subcommittee. So that's including ours, infrastructure and environment. It's including the Health and Welfare Subcommittee, chaired by Rep. Minor Brown and Rep. Johnson, Economic Empowerment, chaired by Representative Dorsey Walker, Education, and some other subcommittees will all be able to give the final recommendations to this body that will come together and continue the work of the task force. If no one else has any questions, oh, Dr. Saunders.
Yeah, I just had a question, and my memory needs to be refreshed regarding the recommendation having to do with the department-wide position of environmental justice coordinator. You know, there was some discussion about having a coordinator for each county and use of the word accountability. How what was that? How was that introduced to the full task force? I mean, I see in our notes that we said, okay, DENREC should create the department-wide position of Environmental Justice Coordinator, reporting directly to the Secretary, who can act as a liaison with EJ communities, ensure all the divisions are properly incorporating EJ principles.
Excuse me, Senator Pinckney, I'm gonna have to get off, and I apologize for interrupting you, but I'll be on the next meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Stafford. We got our official business done, so you gave us just enough time.
I'm glad I could be of some help. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Dr. Saunders, I do remember that one. Rep. Lambert, am I remembering that we removed that one because it was work that was going to be done in the Justice 40 task force, or was there another reason? I cannot remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, that one wasn't taken on specifically in the Justice 40. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't remember what happened with that one.
Yeah, I know. I think that's the meeting that Senator Lockman chaired by herself. I wasn't there. Caitlin, I see you.
Senator? Yeah, so the recommendation to create the position of Environmental Justice Administrator was elevated to the full body when the full body met on January 24th. And my recollection is that the recommendation passed. And I will read off how the recommendation was presented and voted on. So it said, DENREC should create the department-wide position of Environmental Justice Administrator, reporting directly to the Secretary, who can act as a liaison accountable to environmental justice communities and ensure all divisions are properly incorporating environmental justice principles. This role should be expanded in the future to include environmental justice coordinators for each county who would report to the Environmental Justice Administrator. So that's what was passed at the subcommittee level with 9 yes and 1 abstaining, and then the full body passed it. I don't remember the vote count from the full body, but it did receive enough to pass.
Yeah, 19 yeses and 4 abstentions.
And I think DENREC's already seeking funding to staff that position. Is that correct?
Yes, for the one position.
Right.
And I think Secretary Garvin probably was one of the ones who abstained.
Yeah, we had a lot of that last meeting.
Just because, you know, his department hasn't asked for the budget for the county-wide coordinators, but it did pass, so.
So Dr. Saunders, that one made it all the way through.
Okay, great. I think I abstained because I was still, you know, wanting some authorization of the term accountability. I think that was a part of the discussion too. So, but anyway, this is good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. With that, I think we can move forward to public comment if there is any, Reed.
Not that I can see.
Okay. With there being no public comment, I think we can entertain a motion to adjourn until our next meeting, which will be our last and final meeting of our subcommittee